Good afternoon. How are you? Well, the weather is cloudy, overcast, and temperature is 54 degrees, although it feels warmer. Yeah, I'm wearing so much. And humidity is at 70%, so that suggests rain might not be that far away. And while the winds are 3.1 miles an hour now, according to Thomas Jefferson, they'll be at 15 miles an hour a little later. You have to wonder what kind of people feel comfortable with Trump. And in New York, there was a phenomenon for a period of time when I was younger in which they referred to it as the guilt of the radical chic. And I don't know that you had to be radical or chic, because a lot of people seemed interested in the bad guy, the criminal, the rogue, the guy or gal, less frequently, who gets away with it. And so in New York, there were two examples of how this went too far. For example, there was a guy named Joey Gallo, and he's a mobster. He spent his time, he killed people, he did all those kinds of things. And it was believed that he killed Joseph Colombo, the head of the Colombo crime family, on Columbus Day. Not him personally, but there was a shooter. And there were mixed reviews about who did it, but most people, including myself, think it was Joey Gallo. So Joey Gallo was with a bunch of these she people, and they were all going to come with him to Umberto's Clam House in Little Italy. And it's a place down the street from an Italian restaurant I'd go to all the time. It was run by, shall we say, organized crime people. And supposedly, and there are two stories about this, either three people or one person came into the restaurant shooting, and ultimately they fatally wounded Joey Gallo, who died. And so then the question was, you're celebrating these people, and they're horrible criminals, and they do terrible things, and you think it's cool to hang out with a criminal. Now another one, Norman Mailer was writing a book, and one of his sources became this guy Jack Abbott, who was also one of these guys who just sort of lives amidst murder and mayhem and violations of the law. And he was at a bar one evening, and he got into a petty disagreement with somebody, and he was so deft with a knife, he pressed the knife right into the guy's heart and killed him instantly. Norman Mailer had a price to pay in a public relations sense, because he had the book coming out at about the same time, and he said he'll regret it the rest of his life. We see that phenomenon in small and large ways with MAGA, I think, and with the other things that people seem to tolerate. Now, front and center today, although it's hard to choose which is the primate activity of Trump on a single day, but I think it's fair to say if he's contemplating a war with Venezuela for nothing more than the bullshit he says, can you imagine that he's any different than Joey Gallo? And he was close to these guys. He had a tenant who was in the organized crime family, and supposedly was helped on some of the contracts in the city. So this is not a metaphorical leap when we're talking about it. So our local, like a mobster in the West Wing, Trump, it says he's going to stop suspected record cocaine seizures. Now, first of all, how do we know they're suspected? Unlike the Coast Guard that stops a ship and goes on board and looks and so forth and may be fooled or may seize drugs, he's blowing up the evidence. Do they go down into the water and see that there's remnants of cocaine? It's ridiculous. So suspected, and that these people are themselves legitimate suspects, is really an open question. Or, more fairly, It's a lie. It's a lie by Trump. And he talks about record cocaine seizures that he'll make because they haven't been. Now, not only does he have no proven knowledge of what substance is left, if there was any substance on these boats, but the U.S. Coast Guard has seized 225 metric tons. And that's no small stuff. So you can't hardly say that they haven't been active and legitimately, unlike mobster Trump. So the ongoing thing is then, what are we going to do? We're going to use this attack on Venezuela, or hold them up, a protection racket like the mobsters are used to, or have it ongoing and claim it is the predicate for the equivalent of martial law because we're protecting our country against cocaine. Now, the thing about Trump is that the man is celebrating that he's blown up 20 boats, caused 80 deaths in violation of international law and war crimes and the international waters, and in the notion of fundamental fairness or due process, without information beforehand and without any evidence. He's blowing up ships and declaring a war. Now, he started, it was going to save us from fentanyl. But in the Pacific and Caribbean, the drug of choice, if there's any, is cocaine. It's not fentanyl. And so these are all the indicia of how Trump lies about things to get to another place. In this case, to have a phony reason to have a war. And most wars get started by distortions of the reason for the war. But a reason to have a war, so he can use that as a predicate in America for troops in major cities, including, I would suspect, the Dem cities, but also beyond that. Any city that, is just not favorable to him, perhaps. Because this is more of a political campaign than it is a police enforcement at a stratospheric international level. So this is the danger about him. Now, there's also talk, of course, about the relationship between Trump and Epstein. And it was poo-pooed today in one broadcast by Cohen, former fixer for Trump. And he was talking, they just had a relationship. Whoa. But it was craven. I mean, how can you consider it an ordinary relationship if it involves being a predator for underage children? Almost those two words don't really go together. You just say children. But, and then we have, people like Megyn Kelly suggesting, some people look older, some look younger. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not a defense. It doesn't make it right. And at what age does a person in their 50s, 60s, 70s not know they shouldn't be, A, messing with somebody who's a child, and tricking them and grooming them so that their consent is meaningless, which is why in the first place we talk about the age of children who can't make contracts and do other things. So, but Trump claims it's fentanyl they're destroying, or at least he said that the other day. Now somebody's right pounding him saying, no, say cocaine. And he wants to say that there are 20,000 lives they're saving from coke or the absent fentanyl. And that's interesting because it shows recent statistics, real ones, honest ones, as opposed to what he makes up in conversation like a used car dealer, that deaths from opiates has declined, and it's because they're life-saving drugs. So, for example, in 2023, when it was about 112,000 deaths, in 25, current year, it's supposedly down to 74,000. Now, death is death. And, people who say, they committed suicide because of the opiates or whatever, consider if you don't have insurance. Consider if you, take Colombo. He was shot, supposedly by Joey Gallo's ally, and he lived, but he was paralyzed the rest of his life. So, people in that situation, or anything similar that denies them of the enjoyment of life, can lead to suicide. And, when it happens because they don't have health insurance, or they don't know enough to go to a doctor, or life just bangs them around, and we live in a society that occasionally says something about mental health, but apparently doesn't really believe that it works. So this is the problem we have in America, that the words are cartoonish that justify the most craven, hurtful, painful, unlawful actions by the mobster in the West Wing. So, and then, our failure, you can go on forever, and we do, and that's one of the things that apparently saves Trump, because then nobody reacts with the remedy for it. For example, why did we not go to the Brazilian conference when all the nation states and the principal nations of the world did go? And the answer is because Trump wants to take a bow to the fossil fuel persons who underwrite his campaign, and this is how he does it. So, for example, presently, if you follow the ocean's network of currents, the Atlantic is sending heat northward in the waters, and this makes more temperate in the northern reaches, habitation and so forth. But if this current stops, there'll be, ironically, as a result of higher global temps, then will we act? Will it be too late? Sure, of course it will be. But Trump doesn't care. He's the puppet of the fossil fuel class. Drill, baby, drill. Suck up that gas. Spread it. Who cares what it does to the air around us? He won't be here. I guess he figures when the consequences can destroy the whole planet, huge segments of it, people will be going without food or water. There's already a large contingent of people wandering around our planet as refugees for all sorts of reasons, conflict being one of them. And I mentioned before that when you read newspapers, maybe 10 years ago, I don't know where it happened, but if you saw an international story, it'd be buried a little bit, and nobody put ads on those pages. Well, that's changed. Open whatever paper you're getting and see the number of pages. And I can't vouch that if you read the content of the stories, you'll find they're true. You have to know the writers. You have to know the reputation of the paper. You have to know the implication of the owners of the journalistic enterprise interfering in the content of the message. So, if we don't do anything, don't change presidents, don't engage, a toxic weather stew is what we can expect. And, notice when you go to your sources of news, how the feeds are spewing softer people pulp. What is Schwarzenegger doing about X or Y? And there's like a remote reference to him being involved in the California Proposition 50 fight. It's always about the donkeys at his house and what shows he's involved in and so forth, and that's okay. But it seems that we want to look at who's dating whom, divorced whom, what's their story, their misleading leads. And so the National Enquirer, as a model, seems to be duplicated in what was legitimate press. The so-called president, felon Trump, he's paying a cost for this in terms of unfavorable ratings by the public. The New York Times said he's at 44% support. And so that's not enough for a nation to be led, because it takes a devotion and trust and sense to follow a leader. And our leader, or wannabe leader, who'd rather be a dictator, doesn't give a damn about that. So, another take is Bondi, the AG of injustice. She looks at Clinton as a possible person should be prosecuting in the Epstein matter. Now, when do you talk about this stuff publicly? You don't. It's inappropriate. That Fifth Amendment, presumption of innocence, all those things, protection of privacy, people coming out. You'll never hear the president say, I just wait and see. I'm surprised they're going after Clinton. Why? You asked them to do it. Now, it's kind of interesting in a way that Epstein said Clinton was not at his sexual fantasy island. I don't know if that's true, but you have Epstein vouching for someone we believe may have been a participant. But, the simple answer as a citizen to that is, okay, if, in fact, you've done this, well, then you should be punished for it. It's not complicated. It's only complicated if you're trying to decide politically who gets the benefit of being well-connected, or being in the political class, or having enough power that it's dangerous to go after this or that person. Now, Trump, always concerned about looking for the absolute worst thing he could do, is having a dinner for MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. And he's going to have this dinner at the White House, not yet in his ballroom, which, if we have our way, will never be built. And we have to make sure that he doesn't get to build it, and whatever building is chosen should be the subject of discussion by anybody else but Trump. But this evening, I believe it's this evening, he's having this great dinner, and there'll nary be a mention of the killing of Khashoggi. When I say the killing, I mean he was at an embassy in another nation state. They killed him, they cut him up, and they carried him out. Now, some say MBS was not involved in that. These were rogue agents. That was his story. But in fact, in truth, what really went on was, people say that MBS signed off on it. The CIA reported that. The hit team was approved in 2018. So this is what we deal with on a daily basis. Lies, horrible policy, compromising individuals, our nation, making us impotent, or certainly weak, in the in the world of nation states. So this is what we have to deal with, and not everybody is or does or will. And we have to continue the push. And the push is, yes, rallies, elections, court cases, letters, op-eds, small or large contributions, sometimes of time, conversation with a neighbor. Baby steps here, when accumulated, aggregated, can overturn this corrupt movement that has had forerunners that failed in the past. And we have to see that this one does as well. So that's what I got to say in our cathedral of trees. And I look forward to talking to you tomorrow. All the best. Bye-bye.